Curupira, guardian of the forbidden forest. A Brazilian legend. Imagine you're lost in the Amazon rainforest. Your compass spins uselessly. The footprints you've been following for hours, clear as day in the mud, suddenly vanish. Or worse, they're leading you in circles. You're certain you've passed the same strangler fig 3 times now. The sun is setting. The forest is getting darker. And then you hear it. A whistle, high-pitched, playful, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. You spin around, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, you see him. A boy, no more than 12 years old, with skin the color of copper and hair like flames. He's standing on a branch 30 feet up, and he's smiling at you. You blink, and he's gone. But his footprints remain, leading deeper into the forest, away from safety, away from civilization, away from everything you know. And God help you if you follow them. Welcome to the legend of the Curupira, Brazil's most ancient, most feared, and most misunderstood guardian spirit. This is not a children's tale. This is a story written in blood, carved into the bones of the rainforest, whispered by indigenous peoples for over 500 years. And it's as real today as it was when the first Portuguese colonizers set foot on Brazilian soil. Our story begins in 1560, in the steaming jungles of what would become the state of São Paulo. Father José de Anchieta, a Jesuit missionary who would later become one of Brazil's most important chroniclers, was traveling through Tupi villages, learning their language, documenting their customs. The Jesuit order had only recently established itself in the colony of Brazil. The ink was barely dry on the 1549 charter that created the first Brazilian government. Anchieta was a man of God, a scholar, a rationalist by the standards of his time. But what he heard in those villages troubled him deeply enough that he wrote it down, preserving it for history. The Tupi people spoke of a creature they called Caipora or Curupira. The names varied by region, but the essence remained the same. A demon, they said, a trickster, a forest spirit with backward feet who protected the animals and punished those who took more than they needed. In his letters back to Europe, dated 1560, Anchieta wrote, "There is among these people a great fear of forest demons whom they call Curupira, which they say has feet turned backwards, and thus deceives those who track it." But Anchieta's account was just the beginning. As Portuguese colonization spread like a disease through the Amazon basin, more and more Europeans encountered something they couldn't explain. Let's talk about those feet, because this isn't just a quirky detail. It's the key to understanding everything about the Curupira. And then you understand. The tracks were never leading north. They were always going south. Someone, something, walked through here, and its feet point the wrong way. The Tupi peoples understood this as a divine protection mechanism. The Curupira, they explained to bewildered colonizers, walks with its heels forward and its toes pointing back. Any hunter foolish enough to track it by its footprints would walk deeper and deeper into the forest, away from their camp, away from safety, following what they believed was prey until they were hopelessly lost. By the time they realized their mistake, the sun would be setting. The forest would be alive with jaguars, pit vipers, wandering spiders the size of dinner plates. And the Curupira would be watching, whistling its eerie song, waiting to see if they'd learned their lesson. In 1618, a Franciscan friar named Vicente do Salvador published Historia do Brasil, the first comprehensive history of the colony. In it, he documented something that still sends chills down the spines of rubber tappers and jungle guides to this day. Do Salvador wrote of indigenous guides who would suddenly freeze mid-step when a certain sound pierced the jungle canopy. "It is the devil's flute," they would say, making signs of protection. "We must leave, now." The whistle is described across centuries of accounts with remarkable consistency. High-pitched, musical, seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously. Some say it sounds like a human child calling out. Others describe it as bird-like, but wrong somehow. Too melodic, too intelligent, too purposeful. Modern Brazilians who work in the Amazon, biologists, guides, loggers, indigenous peoples, still report hearing it. In 2003, a research team from the University of São Paulo, studying jaguar populations in the Pantanal region, reported in their field notes, later published in a 2005 journal article, that their indigenous guide, a Cadiveo man named João Villalva, refused to continue after hearing what he called the Curupira's call. "I have worked in this forest for 40 years, Villalva told them. "I know every bird, every monkey, every sound. That was not a bird. That was not a monkey. We leave, or I leave you here." The research team, to their credit, followed his advice. They broke camp within the hour. But who or what is the Curupira, really? The descriptions vary, but certain elements appear again and again across centuries and across thousands of miles of Brazilian territory. Small, usually appearing as a child, between 10 and 13 years old. Some accounts say 7 feet tall, others say no taller than a young boy. Skin described as dark red or copper-colored, like the indigenous peoples of Brazil. And the hair, always the hair, bright red, orange, the color of flames. Wild and unkempt, standing up as if charged with static electricity. The eyes are mentioned less frequently, but when they are, they're described as unsettling. Some say they glow green in the darkness. Others say they're black, like a jaguar's. Still others claim the Curupira has no eyes at all, just smooth skin where eyes should be. Yet it sees everything. In Bahia, the legend takes a slightly different form. There, stories passed down through Afro-Brazilian communities who arrived as enslaved peoples starting in 1538 and blended their Yoruba traditions with indigenous beliefs, speak of the Curupira as a protector, specifically of runaway slaves who fled into the quilombos, the hidden communities in the forest. The hunters followed tracks deep into the jungle, deeper than they'd ever gone, so deep that their dogs became confused and fearful. And then they realized the tracks they'd been following for 6 hours were leading them in a massive circle. They were lost. 2 of the hunters never made it out. Their bodies were found weeks later, though the cause of death could never be determined. The enslaved people? They vanished completely. The legend says the Curupira led them to safety, to a quilombo hidden so deep in the forest that it was never found. Fast forward to the late 1800s, the height of the Amazon rubber boom. This is when the Curupira legend transforms from indigenous folklore into something that terrified even the most hardened European exploiters. Between 1879 and 1912, the Amazon experienced an economic explosion driven by rubber. Manaus, a city in the heart of the rainforest, became one of the richest cities in the world. An opera house, the Teatro Amazonas, was built in the middle of the jungle, its materials imported from Europe, its dome covered in 36,000 ceramic tiles painted in the colors of the Brazilian flag. But this wealth came at an unspeakable cost. Indigenous peoples were enslaved, tortured, murdered. The forest was ravaged. Entire populations were wiped out. The Huitoto people alone lost approximately 30,000 members during this period, murdered or worked to death extracting rubber. And the stories of the Curupira exploded. Rubber tappers would venture deep into the forest, far from their camps, seeking untapped rubber trees. They would disappear. Search parties would find their tracks leading into impossible terrain. Straight up cliff faces, into rivers, circling the same tree 50 times. Some were found alive, days later, completely mad. They would babble about a child with burning hair who showed them wonders and terrors, who made them promises in a language they didn't understand but somehow comprehended perfectly. In 1896, a rubber baron named Julio Cesar Arana, who would later be investigated for crimes against humanity, sent a group of workers into a particularly rich area of forest near the Putumayo River. 12 men went in. 4 came back. They told stories of a creature that had stalked them for 3 days, mimicking human voices, calling out their names, leading half their party into a swamp where they vanished. Arana, a cruel man by any measure, reportedly never sent workers back to that area. The devil protects that forest, he was quoted as saying, "Find your rubber elsewhere." Here's what makes the Curupira legend so enduring, so powerful. It has rules, and those rules make sense. According to the accumulated wisdom of centuries, the Curupira doesn't attack without reason. It protects. It enforces balance. It guards. Take only what you need. You'll be safe. Kill a deer to feed your family. The Curupira may even help you, leading you to water, showing you the way home. But kill for sport, kill pregnant animals, set fires, take more than you can use. Then, you've made an enemy of something ancient and implacable. Brazilian environmental anthropologist Dr. Berta Ribeiro documented in her 1987 work, Amazonia Urgente, dozens of accounts from indigenous communities about the Curupira's justice system. The Kapo people of Maranhão state told her that the Curupira specifically targets those who waste what they kill. But the Curupira also rewards respect. Stories abound of hunters who have been lost, genuinely lost through no fault of their own, who left offerings, tobacco, cachaça, honey, and found their way home guided by a child's laughter and perfectly clear footprints that for once led in the direction they actually pointed. You might think that in the 21st century, with satellite GPS and smartphones, the Curupira legend would have faded. You would be wrong. In 2012, a group of illegal loggers working in the Jamangsim National Forest in Pará State abandoned their equipment and fled. When authorities investigated, they found chainsaws, trucks, everything, just left behind. The loggers, when questioned, told a story that made headlines across Brazil. They'd been cutting mahogany trees in a remote area. On the third day, their compass stopped working. Then their GPS. Then their truck wouldn't start, though there was nothing mechanically wrong with it. They heard whistling. They saw footprints. And then they said, a child appeared, a boy with wild red hair, who stood at the edge of their camp and just stared at them for hours. He didn't move, one logger told reporters. Didn't blink. Just stared, and we all knew, that if we stayed, we would die. So we left everything and ran. In 2016, a documentary crew from TV Globo went into the Amazon to film indigenous communities for a special on environmental protection. Their indigenous guide, Rani Metuktire's nephew, told them about an encounter his uncle had had years earlier with what he believed was the Curupira. Rani, famous for his environmental activism, had been walking alone through the forest near the Xingu River in the 1980s when he came upon a boy sitting on a fallen log. The boy had hair like fire, Rani said, and feet that pointed the wrong way. They stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then the boy smiled, put a finger to his lips, and vanished. Not ran away, not climbed a tree, but simply ceased to be there. Rani, who passed away in 2024, told that story for the rest of his life, and he was convinced the forest has guardians, he would say. We are not alone there. We have never been alone there. Skeptics, of course, have explanations. Disorientation, malaria-induced hallucinations, the psychological effects of isolation and fear in an alien environment, misidentified animals, perhaps tapirs, whose tracks can look strange in mud, the calls of exotic birds that the human brain interprets as whistles. And yet, Dr. Carlos Fausto, an anthropologist at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, who has studied Amazonian indigenous cultures for over 30 years, wrote in his 2001 book, Inimigos Fies, Fierce Enemies, that dismissing the Curupira as simple superstition misses something crucial. The Curupira, Fausto argues, represents an indigenous understanding of forest ecology that predates Western science by millennia. It is a conceptual framework for sustainable resource management, encoded in mythological form. Think about it. A creature that punishes overhunting, that leads wasteful hunters astray, that protects pregnant animals and the young, that rewards those who take only what they need and show respect to their environment. The backward feet, a teaching tool, a reminder that things in the forest are not what they seem, that you must pay attention, think carefully, respect your surroundings. The whistling? Perhaps a warning system indigenous peoples developed, teaching children that certain sounds mean danger, leave this area. Or perhaps Dr. Fausto is being too rational. Perhaps the indigenous peoples are right, and Western science is simply not equipped to understand what lives in those forests. In 2019, as fires ravaged the Amazon, with Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro's government rolling back environmental protections and encouraging development, something strange happened on Brazilian social media. #Curupira. Desperto started trending. The Curupira has awakened. Brazilians, both indigenous and not, began sharing stories, modern stories, recent stories, A farmer who tried to burn forest for cattle pasture watched his equipment mysteriously fail over and over. Loggers who found their camps destroyed by what they could only describe as something angry. Gold miners who swore they heard children's laughter echoing through their illegal mining sites before accidents happened. Equipment malfunctions, tunnel collapses, always when no one was hurt, but the message was clear. Leave. Environmental activist and indigenous leader Sonia Guajajara spoke at a climate conference in 2020 and mentioned the Curupira directly. Our ancestors knew, she said. The forest protects itself. We call it Curupira. You might call it karma or nature's revenge. But it's real. The forest is fighting back. By 2023, with deforestation rates beginning to decline under the new Lula administration, there were reports from multiple sources of illegal logging operations simply being abandoned. The official reason was increased enforcement. But workers told different stories. Stories of whistles in the night, of footprints that led in circles, of a child with fire-red hair who appeared at the edges of camps, watching, waiting. So what is the truth about the Curupira? Is it a metaphor? A conservation parable? A misunderstood natural phenomenon? Or is it exactly what the indigenous peoples of Brazil have been saying for over 500 years? A guardian spirit, ancient as the forest itself, protecting what is sacred. I'll tell you what the truth is. It doesn't matter whether the Curupira is real in the way we understand real, or real in the way that justice is real, or love is real, or fear is real. The effect is the same. For centuries, this legend has protected the Amazon. It has kept people out of areas that should not be disturbed. It has enforced sustainable practices. It has reminded human beings that they are not the masters of the forest. They are guests, and they can be asked to leave. In the indigenous worldview, which predates Western philosophy by thousands of years, there is no hard line between myth and reality, between spirit and matter, between story and truth. The Curupira is real because it has power. It shapes behavior. It protects the forest. That makes it as real as any scientific law, any physical force. And here's the thing that should terrify us. The indigenous peoples also say that if the forest dies, the Curupira dies with it. And if the Curupira dies, there will be nothing left to protect us from ourselves. If you enjoyed this story, please hit subscribe down below, and we'll see you next time.